My name is Jonas, and I just turned 30 last month. What should have been a celebration turned into the final straw in a long pattern of unfairness. While my parents charged me $1,800 monthly rent to live in their basement, my younger brother Jason enjoyed his spacious upstairs bedroom completely free. For 18 months, I silently endured this treatment, secretly building something they never expected. The look on their faces when they saw the moving truck and learned I had purchased my own house, in cash, was absolutely priceless. Before I share how I finally stood up for myself, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button to catch more stories about breaking free from toxic situations. The unfairness in my family didn't start overnight. It was a gradual evolution that became painfully obvious when I had to move back home after a series of unfortunate events. My father, Frank, is 58 years old and works as a mid-level manager at an insurance company. He's always been a stern man with rigid ideas about financial responsibility. Every conversation with him eventually turns toward money management, investment strategies, or retirement planning. Growing up, his favorite phrase was "nothing in life comes free," which made the situation with my brother all the more ironic. My mother, Linda, is 55 and works as a part-time accountant for a local business. Where my father is strict and unyielding, Mom tends to be more emotionally driven. She's always had a soft spot for Jason, my younger brother. Even as kids, it was clear that Jason received preferential treatment. When we were younger, this meant extra dessert, fewer chores, and more lenient punishments for the same offenses. Speaking of Jason, at 25, he's 5 years younger than me and couldn't be more different. While I pursued education and career stability, Jason bounced between various interests without committing to anything long-term. Currently, he works part-time at a coffee shop downtown, despite having a business degree that our parents paid for in full. His work schedule is flexible, allowing plenty of time for socializing, playing video games, and pursuing his rotating hobbies. Despite his limited income, Jason always seems to have the latest gaming consoles, designer clothes, and funds for weekend trips with friends. Our family home is a 4-bedroom house in a pleasant suburban neighborhood outside Philadelphia. It's a nice property, nothing extravagant but comfortable and well-maintained. When I moved back, I was given the smallest bedroom in the basement. It had been used for storage previously, and even after clearing out the boxes, it maintained a musty smell. The ceiling was low, the windows were small, and during rainstorms, I could hear water dripping somewhere in the walls. Meanwhile, Jason occupied a spacious bedroom on the second floor with his own private balcony overlooking the backyard. His room was recently renovated with new carpeting, fresh paint, and updated furniture. He also had access to his own bathroom, while I shared the basement half-bath or had to go upstairs to shower. I never planned to move back home. At 29, I had been living independently for nearly a decade. I had a good job at a tech company in the city, a comfortable apartment, and was in a serious relationship with my girlfriend Emily. We had been together for 3 years and were discussing moving in together, maybe even marriage down the line. Then came the layoffs. My company announced they were restructuring and eliminating 20% of positions. Despite positive performance reviews, my entire department was cut. With the tech industry experiencing widespread downsizing, finding a comparable position proved challenging. I had savings, but Philadelphia's high cost of living meant they wouldn't last forever. Around the same time, Emily and I began having problems. The stress of unemployment strained our relationship, and eventually, she confessed she had reconnected with an ex-boyfriend. Our breakup was civil but devastating, especially coming on the heels of losing my job. With my lease ending and no immediate job prospects, I reluctantly called my parents. They agreed I could move back home until I got back on my feet. I was grateful and assured them it would be temporary, just until I found another job and saved enough for a new apartment. 3 days after moving my belongings into the basement bedroom, my parents called me into the living room for a family discussion. I assumed they wanted to establish some ground rules about shared spaces or household responsibilities. Instead, Dad pulled out a notepad where he had calculated what he called my fair contribution to household expenses. We've worked out that your portion of the mortgage, utilities, food, and wear and tear on the house comes to $1,800 per month, he explained, sliding the paper across the coffee table toward me. I stared at the figure in disbelief. That's more than my previous apartment rent in the city, I pointed out. This isn't about market rates, Mom chimed in. It's about teaching responsibility. You're an adult now, and adults pay their way. What about Jason? I asked, glancing toward the stairs where music could be heard blasting from my brother's room. Does he contribute $1,800 too? My parents exchanged looks. Your brother's situation is different, Dad said firmly. He's still finding his way. Jason is going through a difficult phase right now, Mom added, her voice softening. He needs time to stabilize before taking on too much financial responsibility. And I don't? I just lost my job and my relationship. That's exactly why you need to learn financial discipline, Dad countered. This arrangement will motivate you to get back on your feet quickly. I wanted to argue further, but knew it would be pointless. The decision had been made before the conversation even started. That night, I wrote my first check for $1,800, depleting a significant portion of my remaining savings. As I handed it over, Dad nodded approvingly and said, "This is how you build character, son." Little did I know this was just the beginning of a pattern that would continue for the next year and a half of my life. The job hunt was brutal. Each morning, I'd wake up at 6, brew a pot of coffee, and spend hours scouring job boards, tweaking my resume, and sending out applications. Most days ended with no responses at all. When I did get interviews, they often ended with, "We went with a candidate whose experience better aligns with our needs, or we've decided to hold off on filling this position." After 3 months of rejections, I finally received an offer from a small software company. The position was similar to my previous role, but came with a 30% pay cut. I accepted immediately, relieved to have any income at all. The new job required a longer commute, which meant earlier mornings and later evenings. But I was grateful for the opportunity. Even with employment, keeping up with the $1,800 monthly payments to my parents was challenging. After rent, car payments, student loans, and other basic expenses, I had almost nothing left for savings. I cut every possible luxury from my budget, brought lunch from home, canceled streaming subscriptions, and stopped going out with friends altogether. Meanwhile, Jason's lifestyle remained unchanged. If anything, his social calendar seemed even more active. Every weekend, he would invite friends over for gatherings that stretched late into the night. Music would thump through the ceiling of my basement room, making sleep impossible. Empty bottles, food containers, and various messes would be left throughout the common areas of the house. "Could you ask Jason to keep it down next time?" I asked Mom one Sunday morning while helping clean up after one of his parties. "I have an early meeting tomorrow, and I couldn't sleep until after 2 a.m. when they finally left." "Oh, honey, he's just blowing off steam," she replied, ruffling my brother's hair as he slouched at the kitchen table, clearly hungover. "Young people need to socialize. Why don't you join them next time instead of hiding in the basement?" "I can't afford to blow off steam," I responded, trying to keep frustration from my voice. "Between work and my rent payments, I don't have money for partying." "Maybe you should find a better job then," Jason muttered, scrolling through his phone. Dad looked up from his newspaper. "Your brother has a point, Jonas. Financial success comes to those who work for it." The irony of this statement coming from the man who charged his unemployed son rent while letting his employed son live for free was not lost on me. But I bit my tongue and continued wiping down the sticky kitchen counters. As weeks turned to months, the disparities in how we were treated became increasingly apparent. When Jason's car needed repairs, Dad covered the $600 bill without hesitation. When my laptop died, crucial for both my day job and any freelance opportunities, I was told it was a personal expense I should have budgeted for. My health began to suffer from the constant stress. I developed insomnia, lost weight, and caught every cold that circulated through the office. The basement room, with its poor ventilation and persistent dampness, aggravated my allergies. When I mentioned this to my parents, they suggested I could always find another place to live if I was unhappy with the accommodations. The breaking point came one night in early December. I had been working late, trying to complete a project before deadline. It was nearly midnight when I finally returned home, exhausted and looking forward to a few hours of sleep before starting again the next day. As I opened my bedroom door, I was hit by the strong smell of marijuana and spilled beer. Jason and 3 of his friends were sprawled across my bed and the floor, playing video games on my TV, which had been moved from its stand to give them a better view from their positions. "What are you doing in my room?" I demanded, taking in the scene with growing anger. "Chill, bro," one of Jason's friends said without looking away from the screen. "Your TV is bigger than the one upstairs. We figured you wouldn't mind since you weren't using it," Jason added, as if this explanation was perfectly reasonable. I noticed my laptop open on the desk, clearly having been used. Next to it lay my collection of rare vinyl records, several removed from their protective sleeves and stacked haphazardly. One appeared to be cracked. "You need to leave now," I said, my voice shaking with barely contained fury. "Don't be such a downer," Jason complained. But his friends, sensing the tension, began to gather their things. After they left, I surveyed the damage. Beer had been spilled on my bedding, cigarette burns marked the carpet, and my signed first edition book from my favorite author had food stains on several pages. The total value of damaged items easily exceeded $500. I marched upstairs to find my parents. They were watching TV in their bedroom, looking comfortable and unbothered. Jason and his friends were in my room using my things without permission, I explained, trying to keep my voice level. They damaged several of my possessions, including some irreplaceable items. Dad sighed heavily, as if I was being an inconvenience. "What do you want us to do about it now?" "Everyone makes mistakes. I want Jason to replace what he damaged and respect my private space in the future," I replied. Mom clicked her tongue. "Don't make such a big deal out of nothing. Brothers share things. He probably thought you wouldn't mind. He knew I would mind. That's why he did it while I wasn't home." "You're overreacting," Dad said dismissively. "Your brother is just having fun with his friends. You used to know how to have fun too, before you became so obsessed with money and possessions." I stood there, speechless at the unfairness of it all. I was being charged a premium to live in a space that wasn't even respected as mine, while Jason enjoyed complete freedom without any financial responsibility. Something had to change, because I couldn't continue living this way. 2 weeks after the invasion of my personal space, I received an unexpected message on LinkedIn. A former colleague named Alex had joined a tech startup and was looking for freelance developers to help with a specific project. The work would be in addition to my day job, requiring evenings and weekends, but the pay was substantial. "We need someone who understands both the technical and user experience sides," Alex explained during our video call. "I immediately thought of you." The project involved creating a specialized app for the financial services industry. It wasn't glamorous work, but it aligned perfectly with my skills. I accepted the offer that same day and immediately began organizing my schedule to accommodate both jobs. The routine was brutal. I'd work my regular 9-to-5 job, come home for a quick dinner, then code until well past midnight. Weekends disappeared entirely, consumed by endless hours staring at my computer screen. The exhaustion was intense, but for the first time since moving back home, I felt a sense of purpose and forward momentum. 1 month into this new arrangement, Alex introduced me to Daniel, one of the startup's investors. Daniel was in his mid-40s, had successfully founded and sold 3 tech companies, and now divided his time between investing in promising startups and mentoring young entrepreneurs. "Alex speaks highly of your work," Daniel said during our first meeting at a small cafe near my office. He says you have a natural talent for solving complex problems efficiently. What began as a casual coffee meeting evolved into a mentorship that would change the trajectory of my life. Daniel saw potential in me that I had forgotten existed. He pushed me to think beyond the immediate project, challenging me to consider how my skills could create more significant value. "You're solving the same types of problems repeatedly," he noted during one of our sessions. "Have you considered developing a more comprehensive solution that could be marketed to the entire industry?" Under Daniel's guidance, I began expanding the scope of my work, developing a suite of tools that complemented the original project. I learned about business models, pricing strategies, and the importance of building systems that could scale. Most importantly, Daniel taught me about financial literacy, beyond the superficial responsibility my father preached. "True financial responsibility isn't about paying bills," Daniel explained. "It's about creating value and building assets that generate long-term wealth." As my freelance work expanded, I made a conscious decision to keep it completely separate from my family life. I set up a new bank account at a different bank, had all payments directed there, and never discussed my growing side business at home. As far as my family knew, I was simply working late at my regular job. I formed an LLC to manage my freelance work, using Daniel's office address for business correspondence. Every month, I continued paying the $1,800 to my parents without complaint, never letting on that my financial situation was improving. By the 6-month mark, my savings had grown substantially. The freelance work was now generating more income than my day job, and Daniel had connected me with additional clients who valued my expanding expertise. I began researching investment opportunities, following Daniel's advice to make your money work as hard as you do. I lived frugally, continuing to cut costs wherever possible. Every extra dollar went toward building my escape fund. I began researching the housing market, initially just out of curiosity, but soon with serious intent. The idea of owning my own home, of having a space that was truly mine, became an obsession. The careful balance I had maintained came crashing down one evening in May. I returned from work to find my father sitting at the kitchen table, holding a manila envelope that had been delivered to the house earlier that day. It was from my bank, containing statements for my business account that should have gone to Daniel's address. "What is this?" Dad demanded, waving the open envelope. "Lincoln Financial Solutions, LLC? Since when do you own a company?" My mother stood by the sink, arms crossed, looking equally stern. Jason leaned against the doorframe, with an amused expression. "You opened my mail?" I asked, though the answer was obvious. "It came to our house," Dad replied defensively. "And it's a good thing I did. You've been hiding things from us. I'm an adult. I don't need to report every aspect of my life to you." Mom stepped forward. "Don't take that tone. We're your parents. We have a right to know what you're doing, especially while living under our roof. A roof I pay handsomely for," I reminded them. "About that," Dad said, his expression hardening. "Given your obvious increase in income, we think it's only fair that your contribution increases as well. We're thinking $2,500 would be more appropriate." I stared at him in disbelief. "You want to raise my rent by $700 because I'm working harder and being more successful?" "It's about fairness," Mom interjected. "Costs go up, and your ability to pay has clearly improved." "What about Jason's ability to pay?" I asked, gesturing toward my brother. "He still contributes nothing." "Don't bring me into this," Jason protested. "Why not? We're talking about fairness, right? You work, you earn money, yet you pay zero toward household expenses. How is that fair?" "Your brother has different circumstances," Dad repeated the familiar refrain. "What circumstances?" "He has a degree, no student loans thanks to you both, and no apparent expenses since you cover everything for him. Meanwhile, I'm being penalized for working myself to exhaustion trying to build a future." "If you don't like the arrangement," Dad said coldly, You're free to find other accommodations. In that moment, something shifted inside me. The fear and insecurity that had kept me accepting their unfair treatment evaporated, replaced by a cold determination. You know what? I think I will. The tension in the house reached unbearable levels following our confrontation. For several days, communication was limited to terse nods and necessary information only. I continued my usual routine, leaving early for work and returning late, but now with a renewed purpose. The truth about how my parents discovered my side business came out a week later. I was working in my room when Jason appeared at my door, unusual since he rarely acknowledged my existence. "You left your laptop open upstairs last weekend," he said without preamble. "I saw your emails about the business." I looked up from my work, momentarily confused, until I remembered I had briefly used my laptop in the kitchen the previous Sunday while Jason was supposedly out with friends. "You read my emails?" The violation of privacy felt even worse coming from my brother than my parents. Jason shrugged. "I was curious about why you're always working. Figured you might have something interesting going on. So you told Mom and Dad. They should know what's happening in their own house." He smirked. "Besides, if you can afford to run a business, you can afford to pay more rent." When I didn't respond, he continued, "Why are you making such a big deal about this?" "It's just money." "It's not just about money," I replied, trying to control my anger. "It's about respect and fairness. Something this family seems to have forgotten." Jason rolled his eyes. "There you go, being dramatic again. This is why people don't like hanging out with you. You know, always so serious about everything." As he turned to leave, he added, "Maybe if you weren't such a downer all the time, Mom and Dad wouldn't need to charge you rent." That comment, so casually cruel, confirmed what I had long suspected. In my family's eyes, I would always be the outsider, the one held to different standards, the one expected to give while others took. 3 days later, Dad called another family meeting. The atmosphere in the living room was tense as I took a seat on the couch opposite my parents. Jason slouched in an armchair, pretending to be bored, but clearly interested in the coming confrontation. "We need to discuss your attitude," Dad began without preamble. "Your mother and I feel that you've become increasingly disrespectful lately." "Disrespectful?" I repeated. "How exactly have I been disrespectful?" "This tone, for starters," Mom interjected, her voice trembling slightly. "And the way you stormed off during our last conversation." "You mean when Dad threatened to evict me if I didn't agree to pay more rent? That conversation?" "No one threatened anything," Dad insisted. "We simply adjusted our expectations based on new information about your financial situation. Information you obtained by reading my private mail." "That's not the point," Mom said, tears forming in her eyes. "The point is that you don't seem to care about this family anymore. You're becoming selfish, Jonas." I looked at her incredulously. "I've paid you over $30,000 in the last year and a half. How exactly does that make me selfish?" "It's not about the money," Dad said, though it clearly was. "It's about your commitment to the family." "And what about Jason's commitment?" I asked, turning to my brother who was now scrolling through his phone, barely paying attention. "What has he contributed to the family lately?" Dad slammed his hand on the coffee table. "Stop trying to change the subject. This isn't about your brother." "But it should be," I insisted. "You can't talk about fairness and family commitment while treating us completely differently." Mom was fully crying now. "Your brother is going through a difficult time right now. He needs our support. He's been going through this difficult time for years," I said. "At what point does he become responsible for himself?" Jason finally looked up from his phone. "Don't talk about me like I'm not here. Then participate in the conversation." I challenged him. "Explain to me why you deserve free room and board while I pay nearly $2,000 a month for the privilege of living in a basement." "Because you can afford it," he said simply. "I can't." "You could if you worked full-time, or got a better job, or stopped spending every dollar on parties and video games," I pointed out. All the things Dad lectures me about constantly, but never mentions to you. Dad stood up abruptly. That's enough. If you're so unhappy here, maybe you should just leave. Frank, Mom said, alarmed by his outburst. No, Linda. I'm tired of his complaining. We opened our home to him when he needed help, and this is how he repays us? With accusations and ingratitude? I remained seated, oddly calm in the face of his anger. You didn't open your home to me. You rented it to me at above market rate while giving it to Jason for free. There's a difference. Get out, Dad said, his voice dangerously quiet. If you can't show proper respect, then get out. Frank, Mom exclaimed. You don't mean that. I do, he insisted. He's an adult. Let him figure it out on his own since he thinks he knows everything. I stood up slowly. You're right about one thing. I am an adult, and I do need to figure things out on my own. I'll be out by the end of the month. I walked back to my basement room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of my bed. The silence was deafening. For years, I had tried to be the son they wanted, to meet their expectations, to earn their approval. Now I realized that nothing I did would ever be enough as long as they viewed me and Jason through such different lenses. That night was the darkest of my life. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every family interaction over the years, seeing the pattern of favoritism that had always been there, but that I had refused to acknowledge. The brother who could do no wrong and the brother who could never do enough right. As painful as the realization was, it was also freeing. I no longer needed to chase an approval that would never come. I could stop measuring my worth by their warped standards, and instead create my own definition of success. By morning, my path was clear. I would accelerate my plans, break free from the toxic environment, and build the life I wanted on my own terms. The family that should have been my greatest support had become my greatest obstacle, and it was time to remove that obstacle once and for all. The day after our explosive family meeting, I contacted Daniel to discuss accelerating my business plans. Over lunch, at a quiet restaurant, far from my family's neighborhood, I explained the situation. I need to move out sooner rather than later, I concluded. My original timeline was too conservative. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes external pressure forces us to make moves we should have made anyway. What's your current financial position? I pulled out my laptop and showed him the spreadsheet tracking my savings, investments, and projected income. His eyebrows raised appreciatively. You've been busy, he commented. Most people your age aren't this organized or forward-thinking. I had motivation, I replied dryly. I see that. Well, you're in better shape than you might realize. That contract we discussed with Meridian Financial is ready to move forward. They want to license your software suite for their entire Eastern Division. My heart raced. The full implementation? We were only discussing a trial run in 2 branches. Daniel smiled. Their tech team was impressed with your presentation last month. They want to skip the trial phase and go straight to full deployment. The contract would be worth about 6 times what we initially projected. This was the break I had been working toward. The Meridian contract would provide not only immediate income, but also a high-profile reference client for attracting future business. Combined with my existing savings, it would be enough to make my escape plan a reality much sooner than expected. There's one other thing, Daniel added, sliding a business card across the table. Taylor Williams. She's a real estate agent who specializes in finding properties for young professionals and entrepreneurs. Tell her I sent you. I called Taylor that afternoon and explained my situation, emphasizing my need for discretion and a quick timeline. She was professional and efficient, immediately understanding what I was looking for. I have several properties that might work for you, she said. How soon can you start viewing them? Over the next 2 weeks, I viewed 15 different properties, fitting house tours between my day job and freelance work. I told my parents I was working late or meeting clients, which wasn't entirely untrue. Most of the houses didn't feel right, either too small, too far from the city, or requiring too many renovations. Then Taylor showed me a property that hadn't hit the market yet. A small 3-bedroom colonial in a quiet neighborhood 20 minutes from downtown. The previous owner, an elderly professor, had recently moved to a retirement community, and his children wanted a quick sale without the hassle of open houses. The moment I walked through the front door, I knew this was it. The house had character without being outdated, space without being excessive, and a backyard large enough for gardening and outdoor entertaining. Most importantly, it had a dedicated office space with built-in bookshelves and large windows overlooking a mature oak tree. "What do you think?" Taylor asked, watching my expression as I explored. "It's perfect," I replied honestly. "What's the asking price?" She named a figure that was at the upper end of my budget but still manageable, especially with the Meridian contract coming through. That evening, I made an offer slightly below asking price, leaving room for negotiation while still showing serious intent. The sellers countered the next morning, and by afternoon, we had agreed on a price. Because I was prepared to make a substantial down payment and had excellent credit despite my relatively young age, the mortgage approval process went smoothly. Daniel provided a reference letter attesting to the stability and growth potential of my business, which further reassured the lenders. Throughout this process, I maintained absolute secrecy at home. I used my work address for all correspondence, conducted calls from my car or office, and scheduled home inspections and meetings with contractors during times I knew my family would be busy elsewhere. The closing date was set for June 15th, giving me 3 weeks to prepare for the move. I contacted a small, discreet moving company recommended by Taylor and began quietly organizing my belongings, discarding items I no longer needed, and packing essentials in small batches that wouldn't draw attention. I arranged for new furniture to be delivered the day after closing and set up utilities and internet service in my name. Each step brought a mixture of anxiety and exhilaration. I was breaking free, taking control of my life in a way that felt both terrifying and absolutely necessary. The day before closing, I walked through the empty house with Taylor, making final notes about minor repairs and changes I wanted to make after moving in. Standing in what would be my office, looking out at the oak tree that would frame my view each day, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. "Congratulations, Jonas," Taylor said, handing me a bottle of champagne. "You're about to become a homeowner." The next morning, I sat in a conference room at the title company, signing document after document until my hand cramped. When the last paper was signed and notarized, the seller's agent handed me the keys to my new home. "It's all yours," she said with a smile. "Take good care of it." I drove directly to the house, my house, and unlocked the front door. Standing in the empty living room, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what I had accomplished. Despite the obstacles, despite the discouragement, despite being treated as less deserving than my brother, I had created this opportunity for myself. I walked through each room slowly, mentally placing furniture, planning color schemes, imagining the life I would build here. In the master bedroom, I opened the closet and placed a single item inside. The envelope containing every rent check receipt from my time at my parents' house. It was both a reminder of where I had been and evidence of how far I had come. The movers were scheduled for Saturday morning, which gave me 2 days to finalize preparations. I confirmed delivery times for furniture and appliances, scheduled internet installation, and bought basic household supplies. Everything was in place for a clean, decisive break. Friday evening, I returned to my parents' house for the last time as a resident. Dad was grilling on the patio, Mom was preparing a salad in the kitchen, and Jason was setting up a poker game with friends in the living room. It was a typical Friday night, except that none of them knew their world was about to shift dramatically. I went to my room and finished packing the few remaining items. Tomorrow would bring a confrontation I had both dreaded and anticipated for months. There would be shock, anger, and probably guilt tactics. But for the first time, I would be negotiating from a position of strength rather than vulnerability. As I closed my suitcase, I felt strangely calm. Whatever happened tomorrow, I had already won the most important battle. I had refused to accept unfair treatment as my destiny. I had created an alternative, and now I was ready to reveal it to the family that never believed I could. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear. I woke early, long before anyone else in the house would stir. I showered, dressed in clean jeans and a button-down shirt, and made a pot of coffee. Then I sat at the kitchen table and waited. Mom appeared first, surprised to see me already up and dressed on a weekend. "You're up early," she commented, pouring herself coffee. "Big day," I replied noncommittally. Dad came down next, newspaper tucked under his arm as usual. He gave me a curt nod, but said nothing. The tension from our recent arguments still lingered, creating an invisible barrier between us. Jason was the last to appear, shuffling into the kitchen around 10, hair mussed from sleep, still wearing yesterday's clothes. He grabbed a bowl of cereal and retreated to the living room to eat while watching TV. At exactly 10:30, a large moving truck pulled up outside our house. Through the kitchen window, I watched as 3 men in uniform exited the vehicle and approached our front door. The doorbell rang, and everyone froze. "Are you expecting someone?" Mom asked, looking confused. "Actually, yes," I said, standing up to answer the door. I greeted the movers, invited them in, and directed them toward my basement room. As they passed through the kitchen, my family stared in bewilderment. "Jonas, what is this?" Dad demanded, rising from his seat. "I'm moving out," I replied simply. "Just as you suggested. Today? Without any notice?" Mom's voice rose with alarm. "I'm giving notice now." The movers began bringing boxes up from the basement, carrying them efficiently through the house and out to the truck. Jason had emerged from the living room, cereal bowl still in hand, watching the scene unfold with undisguised surprise. "Where are you going to live?" Dad asked, his tone suggesting he expected me to say I was moving in with a friend or renting a small apartment. "My new house," I answered, maintaining eye contact. There was a moment of stunned silence. "Your what?" Mom finally managed. "My house. I bought a house. The closing was yesterday." "You bought a house?" Dad repeated incredulously. "With what money?" "My money," I replied. "The money I earned working 60 to 70 hours a week while also paying you $1,800 monthly rent. But buying a house requires a down payment. Closing costs," Dad sputtered, his financial mind quickly calculating. "That's tens of thousands of dollars." "Correct. And a mortgage," he continued. "No bank would approve a mortgage that size for someone your age with your income." "They would, and they did," I corrected him. "Though, actually, I didn't need as large a mortgage as you might think." "What does that mean?" Mom asked, looking between Dad and me, as if trying to understand a conversation in a foreign language. I took a deep breath. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The revelation I had been building toward for months. "It means I paid cash for a significant portion of the house," I said, watching their expressions carefully. "The business you discovered, the one you wanted to charge me extra rent for, it's been quite successful." Jason let out a low whistle. "No way. You're making that up." I pulled out my phone, opened the gallery, and showed them photos of my new home. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, dedicated home office, quarter-acre lot, 20 minutes from downtown. Mom took the phone with trembling hands, swiping through the pictures. This is a lovely home." "Jonas." Dad remained skeptical. "Even with a successful side business, there's no way you saved enough for a house down payment in just 18 months, not while paying us rent." "You're right," I agreed. "It would have been challenging. That's why I created systems and products that generate recurring revenue rather than trading hours for dollars. Something I learned from my mentor, not from my family." The movers had finished emptying my room and were waiting by the front door for further instructions. I excused myself to do a final check of the basement, ensuring nothing had been left behind. When I returned, my family had gathered in the living room, clearly having a heated discussion that abruptly stopped when I appeared. "Jonas," Mom began, her voice softer now, almost pleading. "Don't you think this is all happening very fast? Maybe we should sit down and talk about this." "We've had 18 months to talk about it," I replied. "Instead, you raised my rent when you discovered I was building something successful. We were just trying to teach you responsibility," Dad insisted, though his usual confidence had faded. "No, you were exploiting me while enabling Jason," I corrected him. "There's a difference." Jason flinched at being mentioned directly. For once, he seemed uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact with everyone. "Before I go, I have something for you," I said, pulling an envelope from my back pocket and placing it on the coffee table. "What's this?" Dad asked, not reaching for it. "Every receipt for every rent payment I've made since moving back home. 18 months at $1,800 per month. That's $32,400 total." Dad's face flushed. "If this is about getting a refund—" "It's not," I interrupted. "The money is yours to keep. Consider it payment for the most valuable lesson you ever taught me, though probably not the one you intended." "What lesson is that?" Mom asked quietly. "That financial independence isn't just about having money. It's about having the freedom to walk away from people who don't value you appropriately. It's about creating options for yourself, so you're never trapped in an unfair situation." I turned to Jason, who was staring at the floor. "And that enabling someone doesn't actually help them. It just prevents them from growing up and facing reality." The silence that followed was deafening. Dad opened and closed his mouth several times, but seemed unable to form a response. Mom wiped tears from her cheeks, and Jason continued to study the carpet, as if it contained hidden messages. "The movers are waiting," I said finally. "I should go." As I headed toward the door, Mom rushed forward and embraced me awkwardly. "Will you at least let us know you've settled in safely? I'll text you my new address," I promised, gently disentangling myself from her arms. Dad remained rooted in place, his expression a complex mixture of anger, shock, and something that might have been respect. Jason finally looked up, our eyes meeting briefly before he glanced away again. I walked out the front door without looking back, climbed into my car, and followed the moving truck to my new home. As I drove away from the house I'd grown up in, I felt neither triumph nor bitterness, just a profound sense of relief. The uneven playing field I had struggled on for so long was finally behind me. Ahead lay a future entirely of my own making. The first night in my new house was surreal. After the movers left and the furniture deliveries were complete, I found myself alone in a space that was entirely mine. No parents to answer to, no brother to compete with, no basement ceiling to bump my head against. Just quiet, peace, and possibility. I spent that first weekend setting up my home office, arranging furniture, and unpacking essentials. The house still felt empty with minimal furnishings, but that emptiness represented opportunity rather than lack. Each room was a blank canvas waiting for me to make it my own, free from anyone else's expectations or preferences. For 2 weeks, I heard nothing from my family. No calls, no texts, not even the address confirmation I'd promised my mother. I wasn't surprised, but I also wasn't as bothered by the silence as I might have expected. I was busy settling into my new home and focusing on growing my business, which continued to thrive now that I had a dedicated workspace. The first contact came from an unexpected source. On a Wednesday evening, as I was cooking dinner, my phone buzzed with a text from Jason. "Can we talk?" Not at the house. Somewhere neutral. We met at a coffee shop downtown the following Saturday. Jason arrived looking different than I remembered, more subdued, less cocky. He ordered coffee and sat across from me, fidgeting with his cup sleeve. "Nice place," he said after an awkward silence. "I drove by your house yesterday. Didn't knock or anything, just wanted to see it." "Thanks," I replied, unsure where this conversation was heading. "Look," he finally said, "I owe you an apology." I've been thinking a lot about what you said before you left. About enabling and not growing up. I stayed silent, giving him space to continue. You were right. I've been taking advantage of Mom and Dad's favoritism. It was easier to let them baby me than to actually step up and be responsible. He took a deep breath. I also shouldn't have gone through your emails or told them about your business. That was a shitty thing to do. Yes, it was, I agreed. No point sugarcoating it. Anyway, things have changed at home. Dad's been on my case about getting a real job, contributing to expenses. Mom doesn't automatically take my side anymore. He gave a humorless laugh. I guess they transferred all their expectations to me now that you're gone. That wasn't my intention, I said honestly. I just needed to be treated fairly. I know. And you weren't. Neither of us was. In different ways. He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. They didn't do me any favors by letting me coast. I'm 25 with no career path, no savings, and no idea how to function as an actual adult. We talked for nearly 2 hours, covering years of family dynamics, resentments, and misunderstandings. For the first time, I saw my brother as a complex person, rather than just my antagonist. He'd been damaged by our parents' favoritism too, just in a different way than I had. A few days later, my mother called. Her voice was tentative, almost timid, as she asked how I was settling into the new house. We had a brief, somewhat stilted conversation that ended with her asking if they could come see my home. Jason told us it's lovely from the outside, she said. We'd like to see what you've done with it. The following Sunday, my parents and Jason arrived for lunch. I gave them a tour of the house, watching their reactions carefully. Mom exclaimed over the kitchen and garden. Dad scrutinized the craftsmanship and asked about property values in the neighborhood. Jason seemed genuinely interested in the home office setup, asking detailed questions about my work. Over lunch, the conversation remained superficial at first, focused on safe topics like neighborhood amenities and renovation plans. But as we finished eating, Dad cleared his throat and addressed the elephant in the room. Your mother and I have been doing some reflecting since you left. He began awkwardly. We may have been inconsistent in how we treated you and your brother. Coming from my father, this was the equivalent of a full apology on his knees. We thought we were teaching you responsibility, Mom added. But we can see now that we were actually punishing you for being independent while rewarding Jason for remaining dependent. Jason shifted uncomfortably but nodded in agreement. It wasn't fair, Dad continued. And while I can't say I'm thrilled with how you left, I can understand why you felt you had to make such a dramatic statement. It wasn't about drama, I clarified. It was about self-respect. Dad nodded slowly. Fair enough. And I have to admit, what you've accomplished is impressive. You've established financial independence at an age when many of your peers are still figuring things out. Coming from the man who had criticized nearly every financial decision I'd ever made, this was high praise indeed. As they prepared to leave, Mom hugged me tightly. I hope we can repair our relationship, she whispered. I miss you. I miss you too, I replied, surprised to find it was true. But things need to be different going forward. They will be, she promised. The healing process wasn't immediate or linear. There were still awkward family dinners, moments of old patterns reasserting themselves, and occasional setbacks. But slowly, something new began to emerge from the ashes of our old relationship. Jason found full-time employment at a marketing firm and moved into his own apartment 3 months later. The first time he invited me over and proudly showed me how he'd furnished it with second-hand finds and budget-friendly options, I felt a genuine connection with my brother that had been missing for years. My parents began treating us more equally, though old habits occasionally slipped through. The difference was that now they caught themselves. Or Jason and I felt comfortable enough to point it out when they didn't. As for me, my business continued to grow. 6 months after moving out, I hired my first employee. A year later, I had a team of 5 working from a small office downtown, though I still preferred working from my home office most days. The house evolved with me, becoming more personalized and comfortable as I added furniture, artwork, and the small touches that transform a house into a home. The oak tree outside my office window provided shade in summer and a stunning show of color in fall. I planted a garden in the backyard, finding unexpected satisfaction in growing my own vegetables and herbs. Looking back on the journey that brought me here, I can see now that the unfairness I experienced, painful as it was, pushed me to create opportunities I might never have pursued otherwise. Had my parents treated me the same as Jason, perhaps I would have grown complacent, settling for adequate rather than striving for exceptional. That's not to excuse their behavior or suggest that injustice is beneficial. Rather, it's acknowledging that sometimes our greatest growth comes from our most difficult challenges. The unfairness taught me self-reliance, determination, and the value of creating options for myself. The most important lesson, though, was learning that true independence isn't just financial, though that's certainly part of it. True independence comes from knowing your own worth and refusing to accept treatment that undermines it. It comes from having the courage to walk away from situations that diminish you, even when those situations involve people you love. My relationship with my family today isn't perfect, but it's healthier than it's ever been. We interact as adults with mutual respect, rather than as parents and children locked in old patterns. My brother and I have developed a friendship based on who we are now, rather than who we were growing up. And each night, when I come home to the house that I earned through my own efforts, I'm reminded that sometimes the greatest act of self-love is simply refusing to accept less than you deserve. If you've ever found yourself in a similar situation, know that you always have more options than you might initially see. Creating your own path might be harder than following someone else's expectations. But the freedom on the other side is worth every difficult step. Have you ever had to stand up against unfair treatment from family members? How did you handle it? Drop a comment below and share your experience. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength in difficult situations. And if you know someone who might need this message right now, share this video with them. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in our struggles makes all the difference. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, you are worthy of fairness, respect, and appreciation, especially from those who claim to love you.